Hey everyone, welcome back and thank you for being here. So we're at White Sands National Monument, or National Park, sorry, in southern New Mexico. I also want to double check that we're actually live and this is working. And the microphone, let's change directions, make sure I'm getting levels. Yep, we're getting levels. And was it right moving? Yeah. Okay. So I tried this once already because I went to use the restroom. I went to a different spot. It was really crowded. This spot's a lot better. I feel a lot better about leaving my car here for a little while. I just hope he doesn't poop again. What I've been doing, come on, stop. And this is, I never jump straight into things, but this is a recap video of a conference that I went to, the North Texas Philosophical Association, in late March. But I'm also on a road trip to do some philosophy while camping. I'm checking out some pretty great national parks in like Wyoming and Montana. And well, I was going through New Mexico on the way through, and I have an ex-partner who passed away after we broke up. We stayed close friends. But we went to White Sands we're only here for about as long as I'm going to be here, for a few hours. I don't think we spent the night. Now I don't want to get too far because if it starts pouring, I need to run back to the car. My laptop, the GoPro is safe for water, my laptop's not. It hasn't been pouring down raining anywhere. It's just been like really cloudy. So we're gonna try this before I go to my next campsite late tonight, and it should be fine to pack up. Stop! You can't yank me like that. So at the North Texas Philosophical Association, I gave a paper on, it's just titled World Traveling and Aretaic Worlding in Dufrenne. It's just drizzling. On the virtues of the world of the aesthetic object. And now it's actually raining on us. So, I don't know, guys. I think we're gonna have to go back to the car. It's just that, you know, we'll finish this episode maybe at the next campground. We'll include some footage of the rest of the park, just driving through. We gotta get on the way. I wanted to record this here. I wanted to set up a chair. The weather's really not working with us. There was a ton of dogs. Winchester had to use the restroom a bunch. We got here later than we wanted to. So, we'll use this as the start of the next video. I don't know what's going on. It seems like every time I try to start, it just rains. It's cloudy, it's dark. It was a long drive. It's gonna be a long drive back the other way. I came here for personal reasons, but I wanted to record it somehow. So, I guess we'll just say that this, when I finish this somewhere else, this is dedicated to Kay. So, I will love her forever. But we've got to get out of here. You guys can see the clouds, right? I mean, like, looks pretty bad. So, these dunes are huge, by the way. Some of them are really big. They go really deep that way, and they're pretty sick. I've seen kids sliding around. I've seen people throwing frisbees, mostly sliding on the dunes. I went to a sand dunes in West Texas when I was little with my grandparents. So, we're back at the car. We're gonna get back on the road, get to the campsite, get things set up, and try to finish this tomorrow, I guess. And we'll be by a lake. We're camping on a lake, so we'll be in front of a lake with the rest of the video. So, in like 5 seconds, you'll see the rest, I guess. Thanks for being here. Bye. Hey everyone. So I wanted to continue obviously you know that because this is the video. It's the same video whenever you're watching this. But we're here at Aretaic Lake Campground, and I've got everything set up. I made some footage of that, but it's probably not it's not going to be in this video. It's going to be elsewhere on the podcast and elsewhere on the YouTube channel. Like I said before, all the transit footage and the time-lapse footage of driving and setting up camp and stuff like that is going to go with a specific lecture. So there's a trail that starts here at the campground and it goes around the lake. It's been raining and cloudy today. I got in late last night and the campground already closed, so there's a turnoff next to it. Parked my car there and slept, and then set up camp this morning when they let me in, which was very nice of them. So this trail has these paw prints on it, which is pretty cool. And they go backwards because we're starting at the end of it, I guess. But that's where my camp starts. So at the North Texas Philosophical Association, this should look right. I gave a paper on Mikhail Dufrenne's Phenomenology of Aesthetic Experience, which I covered in a graduate seminar with Professor Edward Casey in fall of 2019, and I just never did anything with it. It was a term paper, so I took part of it and gave it as a shorter paper at this conference, and I guess I tidied it up and tried to make it make sense to different contexts. And I was thinking about, and at the time I was working on the paper that I was working on was about, in that class, it was Dufrenne, Lugones, and Benjamin. And my interest, I guess initially it was that there seemed to be this crossover of world traveling between Dufresne's idea of the world of the aesthetic object. Like, how do we, and I was thinking specifically, like, when I'm watching a TV show or something, or like reading a book, I go into the world of that aesthetic experience. The author has created this world, and I travel to it in some way. It becomes a posture that I take up as real in some sense. There's a suspension of disbelief. And so my interest was what can aesthetic world traveling teach us about, like, socio-political world traveling, as Maria Lugones describes it, in Pilgrimages/Peregrinajes, and specifically the essay. I think the essay came before the book. Beautiful red rock, and like, it's been so cloudy today, but at this point there's enough light out that we can see. And so anyway, Lugones, the essay that she publishes in Hypatia is called Playfulness, World Traveling, and Loving Perception. And great essay. We're going to cover it later in this lecture series after we cover, it'll be our fourth book. We're still on our first book here at Rihanna BQ, but we're making good progress on it. I'm going to keep trucking along and get it done on schedule. And when we cover that, we'll be able to talk more about Lugones' side. But here at the conference for the North Texas Philosophical Association, and again, I'm grateful for Lone Star College Montgomery for providing travel funding to attend the research conference and defray some of the expenses involved in that. So I'm not strictly following the trail, but mostly following the trail. I walked a good portion of this trail earlier to get a feel for it and spend some time with Winchester, and also maybe mark out some spots that I want to set up a chair and the tripod at to do the lectures that I'm describing for Cordova, which How It Is by Cordova is the first book in our series. Anyway, at the time of recording this, we are between parts 1 and 2 in a 5-part book, Bridges and Windows. Beautiful colors, like that deep, almost like jade or sage water. Just beautiful greens and like blue greens. I always think blue-green looks more green than blue. My mom would say that looks blue. So the trail keeps going this way. Come on, Winchester. Just got me twisted around. If you haven't seen this water bottle yet, I squeeze it and it fills up, and then it can suck the extra back down when he doesn't drink it. So it's like, it doesn't waste any water. And it's portable. You can use it on hikes. It's really cool. So that was my paper a long time ago. It was Dufrenne and Lugones. And then there was also some work by Benjamin on the history of an aesthetic object, which does come into questions that were posed to me at the conference about how is the aesthetic object interpreted, or how is the world interpreted? How does it change? And then the sort of, I guess you'd say, like, differentiating effective dimensions and distributions of interpretation. Like, every perception is always hermeneutical and selective. There are things we see and don't see, and even what we see is seen in a certain way or not seen in a certain way. And this is stuff Cordova talks about as well. This is what windows is all about. Like, what windows do we see the world through? Do we see the world through European windows, or through, for her, Native American and indigenous windows? We're really close to, I know we're doing Dufrenne right here. We're really close to the Jicarilla Apache Reservation to the northwest of us, but Taos and Arroyo Seco that she writes about, and where her family is, a certain period in her family's history lived there. They migrated a lot, as we read in part 1. But Taos and Arroyo Seco are to my northeast, so we're going to try to visit those places as well. Yeah, the trail goes this way, and then down there, and then around. Okay. So, come on, Winchester, back over here. Yeah, and Walter Benjamin with Benjamin, we're thinking still about these effective histories, but how does the way that the object is marked and inscribed by labor or affect or any kind of thing that happens to it, by the way that it's transported, and then our own historicities as well, and all these different intersecting world lines of hermeneutic affection, the way that one perception will color future perceptions, or change or prohibit future perceptions. And I think this is what Rancière means when he talks about la partage de sensible, or the distribution of the sensible. Distribution isn't the best way to describe partage. Partage is more like a partition. So we're thinking about the partition of the real, or the way that a shared world gets cut up into differing experiences. Now, Cordova also tells us that a worldview is necessarily shared, because an individual worldview is that of a madman. It's lunacy. It's incomprehensible. One of the things she also says is the reason why Europeans don't think that they have a bias or a worldview or a matrix or a perspective or a window from which they operate is because, obviously, I mean, this is said often, that it's taken for granted, or it's so dominant that it's not noticed. But she points out that it's because that worldview only talks to itself, and studies its own history and its own discourses with itself. And it has to cohere. It has to be brought back to that coherent, unifying, domineering discourse, a monologic or a monotheism. Instead of just respecting absolute difference, like absolute alterity, as she describes it. But she says that that's why it doesn't come up with against the friction of there being another matrix that it has to acknowledge. So in a lot of ways, she's talking with this like worldview conflict, and where Native Americans have two worldviews, and so we're still thinking about world traveling here. And for Lugones, a world is multiple. A person has multiple worlds. Worlds are always inhabited. Worlds are not imaginary. They're always lived and actual, but they're not always presently lived. I mean, they're presently lived insofar as they exist, and they're only they are invoked or incantatory for as long as a human is experiencing them, right? For as long as. But yeah, I've done some work on like potentialism and actualism too, so I'm trying not to get stuck in any of those issues. Or this spot's beautiful, guys. I mean, we could just sit here on the edge for a minute and watch the sunset while we read. I don't feel the need to keep walking. I think this is great. Oh, does that give you vertigo? Okay. That bird on the water. Our next book after Cordova is Sand County Almanac by Leopold. And I think the picture on the front is like a goose across the water. That's crazy. It's just like stupid beautiful. So I think I've given some context to where we're at with this. Chill out, Winchester. So this paper is 13 pages. That's around like 3,000. Try to keep it under 3,000 words. But obviously when I speak extemporaneously and elaborate with improvisation, we add time to the presentation and to the lecture. But I want to try to keep it under an hour, and I want to try to keep, for both the podcast / YouTube / Instagram account, the channel, or the, I guess you'd call it like a philosophy studio, Holy Terrain Art, because it has multiple distribution systems. It's just me trying to teach online, asynchronously. Anyway, and then I also want to, I want my colleagues at Lone Star College Montgomery to be able to sift through this relatively quickly. I mean, taking as long as a beautiful lake and a meditative philosophical article on aesthetics and worlding and history and interpretation would allow, but, you know, a steady, focused pace. The pattern activity on the water top is just going crazy. It's like, it's rhythmic, but there's a lot of complexity to it. World traveling and Aretaic worlding in Dufrenne. On the virtues of the world of the aesthetic object. Presented formally at the 55th meeting of the North Texas Philosophical Association. Spring 2026, with travel funding from Lone Star College Montgomery. This paper explores the socio-political and aesthetic dimensions of world by pursuing dual threads of questioning as they appear in the works of Miquel Dufrenne and of Maria Lugones, albeit only addressing Dufrenne in this shorter scope. The, quote, dual questions which this paper pursues in Dufrenne are A, how does the spectator travel from the objective world to the world of the aesthetic object, a la Dufrenne? And B, how do we travel from our own lived world, a la Lugones, to the lived worlds of others in acts of empathy and of loving perception, albeit, again, this question is only pursued under the context of Dufrenne. Nevertheless, this paper holds that these are in fact the same question posed in different contexts. As such, I seek herein to find a unified conception of world that coherently allows for a critical aesthetics, a theory of art that allows for, is bolstered by, and intentionally promotes social progress under a desubjectivated and multiplicitous fundamental ontology. This essay concisely presents Dufrenne's world of the aesthetic object so as to broach Aretaic worlding in a plurality of contexts, context only one of which belongs to Dufrenne. That's the other thing I should mention before we really jump in, is that by Aretaic worlding I had in mind that distribution of the sensible, right? The way in which one's moral desert or ethical desert or sense of self-respect or conviction either forces one to be silent because they don't respect what they have to say or what their perceptions are, or brings some conviction to assert and take up space and hold down some time. Cordova mentions that time is an abstraction from motion and change, which like Bergson does. I really like that because it spatializes time, right? Time isn't duration and durée are not, and intuition and soul and perspective and experience. But yeah, I wanted to like try to flesh out worlding a bit so that we could start thinking about Aretaic worlding and we could see what virtues aesthetic worlding allows for, what like critical virtues in terms of developing and improving, but also by just kind of like starting to lay the groundwork of what worlding is, we're better able to think about how we can world poorly or well, right? Do we have this very rich experience of our community and our life, or do we constantly reject what our conscious experience is telling us? Do we shut her off and diminish ourselves and try to avoid what we think? I would also like to footnote Ralph Waldo Emerson here. In Acquaint Thyself Firsthand with Deity, so we have some bikes coming, but no animals. Cool. Looks like a dad and a son on a bike, which is really cool. Emerson says that something like our experience of God is experience of a truth or a spirit that is accessible to everyone and conveys a moral law, which either can augment or diminish our consciousness. And so that's kind of what I have in mind with Aretaic worlding, is this hermeneutic capacity based on, they're right, we should get a picture. This hermeneutic capacity based on, we should make sure that we're still recording too, based on moral conviction, moral desert, ethical, what have you, ethical desert, or it's like 18 minutes? 10 minutes? Jeez. All right, we're picking up footage. That's good. And levels, audio levels. Let's get into reading. I hope it's starting to become more clear how this shorter project relates to like worlding in general. I don't want my GoPro to fall off this ledge either. Okay. The work of art, the aesthetic object, and aesthetic experience. The purpose of this section is to establish some Dufrennian terminology in order to coherently explicate in the following section what Dufrenne means by the world of the aesthetic object. The terms which we must first establish include the work of art, the aesthetic object, and aesthetic experience. Dufrenne's phenomenological analysis is always dialectical and thus sometimes iteratively circular. He finds great value in revisiting terms with new insights, but for purposes of clarity I will try to be as linear as possible. That being said, it is not altogether possible to establish Dufrenne's matrix of terms without their referencing each other, often before any one term can be solidly established. There is no a priori term for Dufrenne. The work of art as a term comes close, but even its definition is thoroughly informed by that of the aesthetic object. Nevertheless, we begin. I did not get the photo. Selfie. Obligatory. Oh, did you want to be in the picture, Winchester? That's a cool photo. Gotta send that to my family soon. After I'm done with this. Nevertheless, we begin. We can start by tentatively defining aesthetic experience. I say tentatively because the full meaning of the term can only be fleshed out when its relation to the aesthetic object is established. Yo, it better not start raining. I waited so long for the rain to stop. However, it would not be better to begin with the aesthetic object, which itself requires establishing the work of art, because our discussion of the aesthetic object will not be entirely transparent without some working definition of aesthetic experience. Early on, Dufrenne states, we shall henceforth apply the term aesthetic experience to the spectator's experience. Dufrenne focuses on the role of the spectator rather than that of the creator throughout the work, because he is concerned not with the phenomenology of art, but instead, quite obviously, with the phenomenology of aesthetic experience. I say quite obviously because that's the name of the book. Quote, an inquiry into art would undoubtedly have to be oriented toward creative activity, since it is the study of the creative activity which can best elucidate the intentionality and techniques of the creator. While an inquiry into art would certainly provide more specific answers to the aforementioned questions, such is simply not the task which Dufrenne is undertaking in the PAE. Alternatively, we can establish aesthetic experience as a form of experience, a form of world traveling, to use Lugonian terms. So pretty. The GoPro's kind of hot, so I wanted to make sure, but we need to hurry. That involves aesthetic perception of the aesthetic object. By aesthetic perception, Dufrenne means a perception of the aesthetic object which, quote, gives it full credit. In other words, aesthetic perception must be perception for the sake of the aesthetic object, a perception embedded with respect for the dignity of the work, which in turn manifests itself as an unprejudiced attentiveness. Thus, aesthetic experience, so kind of like an openness, but like an effortful openness. Thus, aesthetic experience refers to a specific form of perception on the part of the spectator, which involves respect and attentiveness. While we must revisit this definition after establishing the aesthetic object, we can preface with a succinct statement that the aesthetic object and its perception, as performed by the spectator, co-constitute the aesthetic experience. I think we could also, one worth mentioning that Professor Casey, who I mentioned at the beginning of this video, was one of the main translators for aesthetic experience. I think Alfonso Lingus and Emmanuel Levinas were also on here. Paul Ricoeur, some really big names. They were editors, not translators. Anyway, that was for Dufrenne. So what's interesting here is also the relationship between respect and effortful effort. What kind of wow. I mean, a light drizzle sunset, that's just insanely gorgeous. It's weird to me that the sunset skips skips those sections that are darker. I don't know what that water is, or what's in the water, where it's not reflecting as much. To get further into our analysis of aesthetic experience without yet delving into that of the aesthetic object, we can explore aesthetic experience's relation to historical relativism and judgments of taste, or rather, its lack of relation. Dufrenne is adamant that while historical epochs do inform and modify our aesthetic experiences of fixed works of art, which themselves do not change, this difference in experience is allowed for but not created by history. Tending to manifest a certain essence, history is only the necessary precondition within which the truth of art and of aesthetic experience can be realized. The role of history does not demote the aesthetic experience to the status of being a relativistic judgment of taste, because the aesthetic experience retains an irreducible essence, a truth, so to speak, though not a rationalistic or like absolute one, which is unveiled by history, and because it is inescapable that history, insofar as it refers to our being in the world at a specific time and place, should exist as the framing within which any agency is possible. That history and context are necessary for for essential eidetic freedom. Further, aesthetic experience may be induced through the ages by markedly differing works of art, but it always tends to realize a certain exemplary form. We can derive two important insights from this statement. I think I'd probably disagree with that also. First, Dufrenne's words here confirm our previous claim that the spectator's historical situatedness affects the specifics of their aesthetic experience. Second, in the latter portion of the statement, we again see recourse to the notion of an essence and or truth. The question is whether a certain exemplary form can change, like, does a certain mean the same certain exemplary form, or just specific exemplary forms? And I think that is more likely. I don't think that's what Dufrenne meant. I think he probably meant that there's a Western canon of best works. The last thing which we shall say about aesthetic experience is that it exists as a singularly describable experience across the different arts. If there is a unity among the arts, and if art can be regarded sociologically as an autonomous institution, is this not because there is a unity in aesthetic experience? Such a unity justifies Dufrenne in exploring the aesthetic experience as a meaningful object of analysis. If such a unity did not exist, then the inferences Dufrenne derives from one art form would not be able to bear on the status and function of a similar attribute in other art forms. I think probably more likely it's true that and the project as a whole would be so particular as to be historical, sociological, and of very little philosophical import. I think it's also true that there's some unity in perception itself. We are now ready to move on to defining the work of art for Dufrenne, like this sort of traveling nature of consciousness, the capacity of consciousness to world travel. We are now ready to move on to defining the work of art for Dufrenne. The answer is quite simple. The work of art is the objective materiality of the aesthetic object in question. The objective materiality within which the aesthetic object latently exists. In the case of a painting, it is the actual painting, on a canvas, though not itself the canvas, within a frame, though not itself the frame, in the objective world. In the case of a piece of music, it is the sound vibrations within a concert hall, perhaps including the concert hall and the other audience members. The score of the piece of music is a work of art as well, granted that I have the necessary knowledge and attitude to properly read sheet music, and in fact, this score is the same work of art with a different aesthetic experience. Additionally, while the natural environment may indeed produce an aesthetic experience within the framework of Dufrenne, natural aesthetic objects and natural works of art do not figure into Dufresne's analysis, and natural objects are not what Dufrenne means by a work of art. Dufrenne brackets natural aesthetics for a later work in order to focus on the core of what he takes to be aesthetic experience, historically agreed upon quote-unquote best works of art. We should pause for a moment of reflection to ask ourselves whether this is an ethnocentric decision. Dufresne's choice to rely on the commonly accepted best work certainly has its merit, and he adequately explains that he makes this decision in order to avoid a hierarchy of art, which would relativize his inquiry. So, like, least controversial artworks to make sure that nobody could, like, strawman his argument. However, this set of works is infallibly representative of the dominant taste within the history of quote-unquote Western culture. It is strange that he references Aristotle's empiricism in the same breath of ignoring the Aristotelian mean as a standard of normative measurement, and a standard of, and the sort of entanglement between descriptive descriptive and normative, like, in the sense of there's not absolute freedom. The mean is not just what you should do, it is also what you cannot help but do sometimes, based on these different hermeneutic levels. Thus again, the work of art is the material object from which the aesthetic object emanates, and in which the aesthetic object exists as immanent. Below the surface and always ready to greet its spectator. Moreover, because the aesthetic object is latent within the work of art, everything we shall say about the work of art will hold true for the aesthetic object, and the two terms may appear to merge. Thus, we can move on to our description of the aesthetic object, knowing that it is the same as that of the work of art, and then some. In contrast, yet in conjunction, the aesthetic object is the same work of art experienced from a different noesis, a different thought act. There exists a unity between the work of art and the aesthetic object, such that they involve different attitudes and different experiences, though they refer to the same content in the objective world. More specifically, the aesthetic object is that which is the object being experienced in aesthetic experience. Moreover, the aesthetic object is the work of art perceived as a work of art. Dufrenne also states that the spectator and the work of art co-constitute the aesthetic object, since the aesthetic object is within consciousness without being of it, and conversely, the work of art is outside consciousness, a thing among things. Thus, the spectator transforms the work of art into an aesthetic object by a noetic submission to the internal logos of the aesthetic object. This submissive aesthetic perception completes but does not create the aesthetic object, quote unquote. In completing it, the aesthetic object requires that the spectator perceive faithfully. In other words, that's a typo. The spectator must, and indeed can, approach the aesthetic object through aesthetic perception only after doing away with all prejudice, including any preconceived notions of its beauty. The aesthetic object itself decides what is beautiful. We shall see that this requirement to do away with our own prejudices prior to traveling to the world of the aesthetic object, a term which we have yet to define, that we can preempt to say refers to the space wholly unto the space or the place wholly unto the aesthetic object which engenders and allows for the aesthetic experience, returns in Lugonis's notion of world traveling. We can infer, both from the preceding discussion and from a few new quotes which I shall introduce, that aesthetic perception is active and willful insofar as it requires skill wielded with intentionality. This is evident in the preceding discussion insofar as we are tasked with perceiving the aesthetic object faithfully and with noetically submitting to the internal logos of the aesthetic object, quote, the proof of its being. We can see this implication further, though negatively, in the following quote. The work of art as present in the world may be grasped in a perception which neglects its aesthetic qualities, as when I am inattentive at the theater, or which seeks to understand and justify it instead of experiencing it, as the critic may do. First, we can see from the preceding quotation that aesthetic perception, insofar as it is possible for us to, quote, miss the mark, requires an aesthetic attention and a set of background knowledge capable of receiving, of perceiving, and of appreciating its aesthetic world. Second, the spectator must foremost and solely partake in experiencing the aesthetic object, a term which is suggestive of feeling. For now, suffice it to say that the spectator must always meet the aesthetic object on its own terms, and doing so implies and even champions an active will on the part of the aesthetic qua world, of the spectator qua world traveler. Section 2, we got that sunset over there. A different blend of blues and oranges and yellows. Grays and more blues and greens. And reds over there. Cool and warm all in one picture. That's crazy. The world of the aesthetic object. Historicity, representation, and expression. The purpose of this section is to finally explicate what it means for an aesthetic object to have its own world, which the spectator may travel to in the aesthetic experience. Foundationally, to begin our discussion, the aesthetic object is the source of a world of its own. However, because the world of the aesthetic object cannot shrug off the objective world entirely, quote, for that would be to dream and not to faithfully perceive something true, it is first necessary to establish what is meant by the objective world. For Dufrenne, the objective world is the whole of perceived objects, not such that it can be known through a science capable of surveying it, but such that it is given as the horizon of all perceived objects and as the horizon of all horizons. By horizon, we can interpret Dufrenne to mean something like edge or boundary, thus rendering the horizon of all perceived objects to mean the perceptual entirety from a given lived standpoint, and rendering the horizon of all horizons to mean, and referring to the set of all sets, the entire phenomenal field of lived existence for all consciousness, and in some meaningful sense, the potential horizons which we might and do encounter as we move through life. Such is a world, and such is indeed a grand and impressive notion. So, this is presumably, I think this is that's the quote-unquote objective world that it has to be grounded in. But that's like the world of worlds. And I don't think we want to, I mean, you need something truly like unity multiplicity, something that defies logic or takes difference as a simultaneity that allows for things that seem to contradict each other. To have a quote-unquote singular world that is adumbrated by so many overlapping contradictory worlds that are lived and embodied, with differing worldviews, and there's, all these notions and windows and definitions and different definitions of the same word. However, the aesthetic object is self-evidently not of the objective world, at least not wholly. The aesthetic object appears in the world as something not of the world. It discloses itself to us in this way. Instead, the aesthetic object, quote, has the being of a signification and of a sign, for the sign and the signifying process of the aesthetic object are one and the same. This is what Sartre says as well about consciousness, that the signification process produces in itself the sign. There's no unconscious production of meaning or perception or experience. Quote, the signification is immanent in the sign, and, quote, lacking such clarity, the signification in question possesses only the perceptual evidence given in the very act of perceiving the sign. The perception of the sign is itself sufficient justification for the truth of that which it signifies. It is at this point which Dufrenne starts to open room for a directly socio-political, look at that flock. That's cool. A flock of birds over a mountainous lake. So Lake Jackson is at like 6,700 feet elevation. It's the tallest, it's one of the tallest, if not the tallest lake in America. And this reservoir is at like 6,200 or 6,300 feet above sea level. We're in northern New Mexico, if I haven't said that yet. Oh. Okay. It is at this point which Dufrenne starts to open room for a directly socio-political aesthetics. He compares the sign signification's existence in the objective world to our experiences of the existences of other subjectivities in the world, other people. This interpersonal expression acquaints us not only with the being of another subjectivity, but also with the possibility of a world which radiates that subjectivity. This statement, opening up the possibility for lived worlds, puts Dufresne's notion of world in very near proximity, if not in identity, with Lugonis's conception of a lived world. And with Benjamin in the historicity of worlding and perception itself, we get something I call once-lived worlds, which are these worlds that have transformed into what they are now, maybe merged, maybe dissipated, but they're inscribed in different ways, in objects and in people and memories and in imagination and in perceptions. In both space and time, the aesthetic object brackets the objective world in order to demand recognition of itself as meaningful in itself. We are concerned with time, for it is time which more directly bears on the world of the aesthetic object's historicity, or rather its capacity to be imbued with the historicity of its creator. Such a statement may seem uncharacteristic, right? The historicity of the creator is the important part about communication and the intelligibility of what is created or communicated or expressed or said or intended. Such a statement may seem uncharacteristic of Dufresne's thinking, since he does not emphasize this function or capacity of the world of the aesthetic object. Winchester, stop. Come here. Stop. Leave them alone. But as I shall draw out, the notion is implicit throughout his thinking, and he makes reference to it often. Thus, we shall begin by analyzing the status of the aesthetic object in time. Quote, every aesthetic object is a historical monument. The aesthetic object communicates to its spectators something about the epoch in which it was created. What it communicates specifically need not be defined. What is important to us is that it communicates something, and that something say something else to us about both its moment of inception and its moment of materialization. So here we're starting to think more specifically about the ways that the ways that affect, labor, and creation imbue meaning into things, and whether it can be communicated. Its actualization in the material world of things, the point at which it actualizes as a finished work of art. Keep in mind that this latter moment, the moment of materialization, may be different between art forms. For a painting, it is in large part the moment that the painter sets down their brush, but because the aesthetic object cannot fully do away with the objective world, it may also include, in a much smaller fashion, the world that made the decision to hang it just so, or to ship it to this gallery in this mode of transport. Each new person along the path of economic production, along with giving the work of art its own historicity, which has socio-political import, whether the architectural work was built with slave labor, whether the work of art was transported via a plane with incommensurable environmental emissions, etc., imbues the work of art with a new piece of creator world, which presents itself in the aesthetic object. The aesthetic object must carry this burden because the logistics of its global transport, of its historicity, and the space within which it is experienced all exist behind the work as its horizons, the portion of the objective world with which the world of the aesthetic object is never to fully do away with. While these further creator worlds do not impact the world of the aesthetic object directly, what Dufrenne will later call the expressed world, they do directly influence the aesthetic experience insofar as they inform and modify the feelings which I bring to the aesthetic experience as spectator. The aesthetic object bears its age and speaks to us of history, quote unquote, the aesthetic object bears its age and speaks to us of history, of the epoch in which it was born. Yet it also speaks to us of the epochs in which it was reborn through the chain of production, as each new viewing, each new aesthetic experience with a new spectator is a further production of the performance of the work, with spectator as performer. We are justified in claiming all of these for a few different textual reasons. The first is that the work of art is only able to communicate an epoch insofar as this implies the capacity for a work of art to communicate the world of the creator. The work speaks to us about its times in the same way that it speaks about its creator, for the times are only the creator generalized. And Benjamin will say something very similar. Those reds and oranges are crazy, you guys. Gotta make sure you're getting those. Yep. What do you get when I'm reading? Not as much of it. Okay. Should I do it like that? Quote, the work speaks to us about its times in the same way that it speaks about its creator, for the times are only the creator generalized. I read that already. Second, the work of art can reveal the creator, though not necessarily the creator who created the work of art. Although limiting ourselves to the experience of the spectator, we shall all the same need to evoke the creator. But the creator then in question is the one whom the work reveals, not the one who historically created the work. That's one of the more perplexing statements. Elsewhere, quote, we know that even the artist whom the aesthetic object delivers to us is not the real artist, but the one who belongs to the object. Benjamin talks about communicability and translatability. He says that the world gives to us its names and what it gives to us what is communicable, and what is communicable is its name. So there's like a delimitation on what it can deliver to us. Specifically, there's a delimitation on what the artist can imbue in it, and so that's the delimitation that is then reflected back to us. Thus, we can already be, but we should say that nothing is ever separate. So the artist still conveys their whole life at every moment, but they emphasize different aspects of it and hide other aspects of it that are latent or influential, but not directly stated or focused on or prevalent. Thus, we can already begin to draw the notion of a once-lived world, the creator, latent in the world of the aesthetic object. Once lived insofar as, even before the creator has died, her world is different from the world which she existed within during the period within which the work of art was created. So the strict period within it which was created and everything happened to the physical object then creates the aesthetic object, the work of art, which is the physical object, right? The history of its production, including the specific versions of the people who were involved in producing it at the time that it was being produced, as well as the worlds that they've inhabited in the past, which led up to them culminating that idea and determining to do things in certain ways with certain skill sets and certain tastes and experiences. All the lived world of the creator at that moment. But there's also a delimitation on what is transmissible or communicable into that specific work, which is never a delimitation on strictly cutting off the rest of the creator, but it does repackage or present only one side of them. Now, when I say one side of them, I don't mean that you just slice off that side. I mean that you get the whole thing from one side. With this caveat in mind, though, we should specify that the world of the aesthetic object is latent with the transitional worlds of the creator during the period within which the work was created. If the world of the creator is once lived insofar as it has already been modified immediately after the work of art is completed, then we have absolutely no reason to assume that the world of the creator was stable during the period of the work of art's inception. It's this really complex process. The world of the aesthetic object, though latent with the world of the creator, possesses another distinction which we must make use of in order to better understand it and to pinpoint where exactly this world of the creator resides. The distinction is that of a represented world versus an expressed world. We will begin with the represented world. The represented world is that which we take to represent to us the objective real world within the aesthetic object. That is, the details of the object's dates, people, and places within the world of the aesthetic object. Think of like a novel, like fictitious elements, which are different from the words on the page or the paint on a canvas presented in such and such form in contrast with other forms. While it is true that the represented world can be presented as lived and dominated by a central subjectivity with which the novelist identifies, this world must appear objective enough for the reader to become oriented there, that world traveling. Thus, while the set of represented objects within the world of the aesthetic object may be selected based on a central subjectivity within the work, it must still be believably real. Further, since the represented world pertains to objects, people, and places in a representational sense, things which the objective world already lays valid claim to, the represented world cannot be said to be the world of the aesthetic object proper. When we go back to like the aesthetic object expressing the world of the creator, there was a long footnote that I want to go back and read. There are further quotes which confirm that your friend thinks that the aesthetic object expresses a, if not the, subjectivity of the creator. While they need not figure into the main line of reasoning in the paper, I include them here for the skeptical reader. Quote, the revelation which the work of art provides, the world to which it introduces us, is due solely to the initiative of the artist whose subjectivity is expressed in the work, thus investing it with subjectivity. Quote, the artist whom the aesthetic object reveals to us, quote, a subject always appears in the aesthetic object, and that is why one is able to speak indifferently of a world of the creator or of a world of the work. The aesthetic object contains the subjectivity of the subject who has created it and expresses himself in it, and whom, in turn, it manifests. But again, remember, he also says it is not the same one who created it. So back to represented world and expressed world. In contrast, the expressed world is that which is communicated to the spectator through the world of the aesthetic object via the medium of feeling. The expressed world is unique and animates the represented world, just as it emanates outward from the represented world. Moreover, the expressed world is always the world of a creator. Quote, the creator as revealed by the work is the guarantee of what the work reveals. End quote. It communicates this world of the creator via expression insofar as the world of the aesthetic object possesses an atmosphere capable of leaving an impression on the spectator and of arousing a feeling, and it is this atmosphere which unifies the work with a rigor and totality capable of our aesthetically perceiving being of the aesthetic object, insofar as we are united with it in aesthetic experience as a totalized world. We should close our discussion of the world of the aesthetic object by noting that while the represented world and the expressed world are distinct in a meaningful sense, they are also interdependent. The expressed world needs the represented world, insofar as the expressed world is the expansion of the represented objects to a unified infinite world, whereas the represented world needs the expressed world to bring this unity to bear on its objects in order for them to be recognized as real, as believably objective, in the first place. Thus, neither one could do without the other, and together, along with a spectator, quote, they compose the world of the aesthetic object. Conclusion, thus we have laid the groundwork for further research in Aretaic worlding, adjoined with and explored through Dufrenne's own phenomenological thinking in aesthetics across multiple key components. I still think atom braided works well there. So guys, we're still recording. We had enough battery and everything. I hope that was cool. Hope y'all like that. I think we're going to sit here and just chill with the sunset, maybe keep walking. Before I dismiss, let me make sure there's nothing else that comes to mind. I mean, yeah, we're thinking about the ways that worlds are produced, and we're shifting a lot of common ways of thinking about interpretation or language or statements or propositions or justification. We're thinking about phenomenology and worlding, hermeneutics and history instead. So it's all pretty complicated. Kinda, not really. It is and it isn't. It's getting cold. I'm gonna go back and use the propane heater. It's dropping to like 50. What is it right now? It's 54 degrees. The low is 48. That was probably this morning, so I don't know what tomorrow's low will be. It feels like 48. And tomorrow it will get down to 45 in the morning. There's not a lot of, since it was so cloudy today, the low is going to be lower because the rocks and the earth itself didn't absorb as much heat in this area. So there's not heat dissipating. And so tomorrow when the sun is hitting it directly, it's going to take longer for the heat to build up. Because that's how physics works. You're still making sure. That's the only bad part about using this head, like the head strap GoPro, is I wonder if I can put headphones in with it. I don't think I brought my smaller ones though. But maybe I could, because it beeps whenever it turns off. But because I have the mic on, it thinks that it tries to send the sounds to that Bluetooth device, and it can't. Maybe that's a setting I can turn off. Anyway, yeah, I think I'm gonna do more Cordova before I do the Pacific APA. The things we're thinking about in these other conferences are really similar to what we've been discussing here. In the Pacific APA paper, I was thinking about justification and eidetic-noetic experience in Descartes, meaning like Dufrenne says that the work of art, or the creator world, the subjectivity revealed in the work of art justifies or guarantees what the work reveals to us. And that's similarly how I think it's best to approach Descartes, is that we are justified in our perceptions insofar as they are correct. I'm not like justified true believing it over here. There's the moon. It's kind of foggy. Surprising. Oh, it's a really light, thin cloud. Thin rain cloud. Guys, I'm going to have to cap it here, I think, because when it gets cold, I don't like being out away from camp. So, thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out. We'll do more Cordova next. And obviously, in terms of the, this will be like an extra credit. I would think of this as in the 4,000 level design, where we're doing all of the we're doing all 5 of these books and this camping trip together as a class, instead of splitting it up into my different classes, and different projects, which is what I'm doing also. Because the lectures are modular and they can be plug and play as needed, as they're appropriate to a course theme and to the readings assigned. But if you were just to do all of this as a single shot, like the way I experienced it, and you're just following along with that version of the ordering, because I can do multiple listings on my website. I can, yeah. So I would include this along the way in the right order. It's a really complicated project with how multifaceted and multi-purpose it is between the hiking, because I'm recording so many different formats of videography, like this, the time lapse while driving, the vlog of just like explaining what I'm doing and as I'm traveling, kind of like the segue stuff, and then also like the tripod with a chair. So it's really fun. It's going well. I'm not sure when I'll do the Pacific APA stuff. I might find a different spot for that around here. I don't want to like do all 3 of the conference videos in the same place. I want some variety. So anyway, guys, like I said, I mapped out a bunch of different spots that we could sit. Like, actually, like that's a really good vantage point over there. So one thing I was thinking is setting up the chair down there and putting the tripod to the right of it a bit and going that way with it, so you get that view for like the next Cordova lecture. And then there's also a drive down that goes to like, I think basically we're in between where those rocks are actually. And so I was going to set the chair at the bottom of that. Like, it looks like an old boating ramp, and maybe it used to be one and it went further down because it says that the edge is collapsing. I'm tired too. Thanks for being here, guys. Glad to have the company, glad to have somebody to talk to. Y'all take care.